I think that I'm gonna reflect back a little bit on neo-evangelicalism and, let's say, 19th and 20th century domestic missiology. When I think about what the standard thing that churches would do, I think about D. James Kennedy's evangelism explosion. This was a very popular neo-evangelical evangelistic tool. It was promoted at churches. It was taught. I got a class in it from Christian Reformed World Missions before I went off into the Dominican Republic. And thinking back on it now, I think that's really kind of, well, I don't know, I could talk a lot about that. But basically, when you think about what something like Evangelism Explosion was, it was an attempt to initiate the U-shaped narrative. And so in that sense, it goes like this. You knock on someone's door, and the imagination is that someone is just there at home minding their own business, and they got little problems and things going on in their life. But you it's very industrial, because you begin by imagining that the person you're about to talk to is a blank slate. Okay? Doesn't matter what happened before they open that door, they're a blank slate. And you present them with this question. If you were to die tonight, what would you say to God to let you into his kingdom, let you into his heaven? Okay? And even if you just look at the story I've told so far, there are huge amounts of assumptions built all into that. Now, it was a tremendously effective program, or it wouldn't have been propagated and spread throughout kind of conservative and moderate, small or Orthodox churches all around the United States. There was the assumption that many of the people would have a basic framework that assumed the narrative you just instilled to them, that you could somehow sort of assume their life was a blank slate until you knocked on that door. But then it also assumed that, well, their goal was going to heaven. And then what you did with that question in a very crafty way was to trigger a little bit of existential angst and doubt that now you're building on an older implicit narrative, pretty much the remnants of medieval Roman Catholicism and Protestant narratives, where, well, the truth is that you're probably hell-bound, and your narratives, well, I'm a good person, well, there's been enough Christianity in the culture that won't satisfy. It's interesting today, because now we're building a new narrative that basically says your white flesh and your consumeristic environmental ways are destroying the earth, and why are you polluting the world with your whiteness, bigot? Why don't you just off yourself and end it all? Either that, or the path to salvation is, of course, own your privilege and use the magic words, and on and on and on and on. So, it's just interesting how we keep coming up with these little U-shaped structures and I think Peugeot was exactly right. Here's the story. Well, what is a story? Well, this is a story. It's, in Reformed terms, it's creation, fall, redemption, restoration. It's a U. And so, where was I going with this? Now, all of those assumptions beneath that U changed, but that U was the dominant salvation narrative within waspy Western, especially American Protestantism, and this was the way in many ways that you could trigger someone to now begin to do a bunch of often very healthy things in their life, because they would begin to get their house in order. They would begin to, now suddenly this whole framework of Christian moral assumption came to bear on this person. You first told them that Jesus was going to save you, by the virtue of his sacrifice. And now, well, that's where the narrative gets funny in terms of, well, is this something that, are you now sort of earning your way to heaven, or is this ingratitude, so on and so forth. So you can see the U-shaped structure, but what happens is that all of the assumptions that evangelism explosion assumed to be there have crumbled and gone. And you knock on the door and you say something like that, and there's still a percentage of the population out there that remains there, but many of them, that whole framework is so completely deconstructed that it simply has no purchase on them. So now so then what happened often in Christian churches, you can see this, for example, in Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. You initiate an existential U-shaped passage by first convincing them of the danger of hell. Once you've convinced them of the danger of hell, now you offer them the solution to the danger of hell. And this, someone might cynically say, well, that's just the path of modern advertising. And I would say modern advertising actually is a redux of this. Is computing too hard? Apple.
I know.
Are iPhones too expensive? Android. It's problem solution.
Yeah, it's where they start black and white, and the woman's like struggling with the, she's like fumbling with a banana split, and like, why can't I make a banana split? And then
here's the Popeil banana split maker. 3 easy steps. And so you're exactly right. You have this U-shaped structure. Now, I have never found it terrifically efficacious to, number one, assume a blank slate, which is why I like to begin with a conversation and actually hear where the person is at, because they've been living for decades before we meet, and they have a conceptualization and a framework of exactly what the story of their life is. And actually, if I want to talk to them, I should listen and then be able to use, imagine myself sort of in the story and be able then to come into their world and become an effective conversation partner within their world. So that's one value. Another value is I both don't find it terribly kind nor terribly helpful to, generally speaking, do the deconstruction for people, because it's gonna come. And they ain't gonna like it. So my position is much more, I'm gonna wait until they're deconstructing and then I'm going to talk to them, because otherwise there's enough people around me deconstructing at any given time that, in fact, as a pastor, the phone rings and someone's deconstructing on they've jumped into their U-shaped structure already, and it's I got plenty of U's to deal with in many ways. So I don't need to go push people over the edge just because I've got a basket underneath and I'm going to instigate the slide for them. It's just easier for me to say, I'm gonna look around and they're in it. You can see them because they're anxious. Their life is kind of turned upside down. And at that point, I think, again, if you enter in, if to the degree that I've had a liturgy in my meetups, it has always been, we're going to go around the room and I want you to tell your story. Now, some people can manage to do that in 3 to 5 minutes. Every now and then you find someone who can't manage to do that at all, or under 3 or 4 hours. And then you have to kind of step in and help them do a little editing. And, we're going to, for the sake of the group, we're going to keep this narrative moving. But if you actually begin with the people's stories, in the long run, you're going to be quite a bit more effective, because otherwise, you know what you really need, Jesse? You need the Popeil banana split maker. And I know your whole life up until now has been meaningless without this banana split maker. And somebody's gonna say, I don't even like banana splits. I don't eat ice cream. There's too many carbs. I only eat meat. So in terms of the values I bring to this conversation and the things that I haven't necessarily described what I do most of the time, because people are, generally speaking, very interested in themselves. And if there's so if there's something you can sort of begin to rely on, it's tell me about you. People are usually quite happy to tell if there's a situation of trust. I mean, if it's hello, this is the Apple Virus Center, and we've detected it, that isn't going to go anywhere. So but and so that's in many ways, if you ask, okay, what is estuary? Well, Paul Vanderklay has talked about it. Well, it's sort of grown out of the meetups. Well, what has Paul done with the meetups? It's all of these pastoral skills where get the people talking, listen to them, care for them, love them. And to me, and that goes over to I was at a church meeting last night, and, someone sort of asked me, because evangelicalism has sort of taken this word evangelism in a certain way. And they've defined it as, well, initiate the U-shaped structure, get them to pray the sinner's prayer, which is sort of the redemption movement there to get them out. And evangelicalism in a very modernist, mechanistic sense often will be like, I got 5 people to pray the sinner's prayer today. I brought 5 souls to Christ. And it's like, oh, okay. But as a pastor, you recognize that, well, someone can go to the crusade and someone can walk down the aisle, and you wind up meeting people who've done it 5 or 6 times. And you say, I don't know if we're all doing the thing that we say we're doing right here with this thing right now. Why don't we treat them as a living human being? Why don't we imagine that their life on earth are probably between birth and death? And why don't we kind of do what Jesus says in terms of loving them? And actually, if you're coming from a Christian position, that Christianity is going to impact and mold your definition of love. And we're always recalibrating that as we go. But the basic call, the good news, which is what, of course, the word evangelism is built on, is, well, what is the good news? Well, the good news is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, why is that good news? And when I hear a lot of people say, well, even if you can get me to, for a minute, buy that Jesus walked out of that grave, what does that have to do with whatever's precipitating my U-shaped structure today? So, and that's actually the job of a pastor, is to help the person steward their story, to understand, what is their story. Now, you can go like stories of old and say, well, there is no real story. And it's like, then why on earth are you doing a YouTube channel? So it's just all pure entertainment? Or is, in fact, does your life have purpose and a point and meaningful? And I, one of the beauties of Peterson was that Peterson saw early on that nihilism, people can't live that way. You might in your scientific brain say, well, that's the truth. It's like, all right, well, you go live that. And people have been pointing that out for centuries, but, modernism and sort of the scientific frame has been so dominant that there's been enough internal reinforcement that's like, yeah, we're totally meaningless. And I'm going to get out there and I'm going to tell everyone how meaningless it is. It's like, oh, okay, well, it sounds like a meaningful enterprise to me, but hey, you want to go for it? You go ahead.
Yeah.